Be seated. And will you join me now, please, in welcoming to our church Dr. Michael Ryce. Thank you.
Has anyone that's here this morning ever had any conflict in any of your relationships? Anybody? Can we have a show of hands? Two-handers, hands and feet back there. Okay, right audience. Has anyone, in order to avoid those conflicts, ever taken the geographic cure? You know where you go to the other side of the country where people will be different? And the person that picks you up at the airport finishes the sentence that the person that dropped you off started? How do they know what to say to you? Or you enter into a new relationship and the first thing you do is you read the riot act. This is what I will not put up with. And then you wonder why 6 months later you're living with it. How does this work? What's going on here? Well, I have some good news and I have some bad news. Before I deliver the good news and the bad news, I like to tell the story about the guy who's in prayer and meditation. And an angel comes to him and says, I've got some good news and some bad news. Which would you like first? He thinks that's kind of a strange thing for an angel to say, but he thinks about it and says, well, give me the good news first. That'll make the bad news easier to take. The angel said, it's been decided directly by God that when you die, you are going straight to heaven. And the guy said, what could possibly be bad news after that? The angel says, you're going in half an hour. The bad news is, there is only one problem in your world, and you're it. You'll notice if you've been through a particular painful reality 87 different times with 42 different people, you're the one that was there every time. You're involved in your life, it's not about them, but there is a trick that the mind plays. And actually, I like to do one experience of speaking in tongues. And the real speaking in tongues has nothing to do with what passes for speaking in tongues today, you know, where somebody babbles in an unknown language and somebody else translates. If you go back into the scriptures, speaking in tongues was a case where the disciples were so clear and so filled and so fluid with the energy of the message they were delivering that everyone heard in their own heads exactly and accurately what was being said, no matter what language they spoke. So I'd like to do that speaking in tongue thing right now, and I'm just going to take a minute and just kind of tap in. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to tell you, and you'll hear in your head specifically the name of the person who's the problem in your life. And is their name by any chance them? If only they'd be different, wouldn't everything be wonderful? And that's a lie that our mind tells us. Our topic this morning is coin of the realm. We want to look at what it is we need to be trading in order to experience living the life that most of us would proclaim we want to live. There's an interesting question that was asked of Yeshua 2,000 years ago. His name, by the way, was not Jesus, a copy of a Greek god, Zeus. His name was Yeshua in his native Aramaic. And the question that he was asked is an interesting one that a lot of people preoccupy themselves with. But what you'll notice when I read this passage from Luke is that he doesn't answer the question. He answers a totally different question, a much more relevant one. And in Luke 10:25, what it says is, the scribe stood up to test him, saying, Teacher, what shall I do to inherit eternal life? Yeshua said to him, what is written in the law? How do you read it? The scribe answered and said, you must love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength, with all your mind, and your neighbor as yourself. Yeshua then said, you spoke the truth. And then he tells him what question that answer matches. He says, do this and you shall live. Doesn't talk about eternal life. Now, was he in essence saying, Sir, if you give up the active presence of love in you, you are already dead. You don't need to be concerned about eternal life. You've got to experience life first before that question is of any relevance. I would offer that just because a human being can walk and talk does not mean that they are alive. And the average person in our culture is dead by the age of 4. It takes another 70 or 80 years for their bodies to fall over. Because the average person in our culture has, by and large, bought into the world myth. And the world myth is based in hostility and fear. And the minute that we buy into the idea that when the stress is up and the chips are down, hostility or fear will get us what we want. In order to get what we want, we give up life. The actual experience of human life is the experience of the active presence of love. It is not a body that can walk and talk. The coin of the realm of God is that of the active presence of love. The world starts us out and weans us on a myth, a lie, that keeps us locked into its belief system. And you'll remember in the scriptures they warned about buying into that lie when they said, do not be molded by the world or you will end up moldy. Remember that one? Okay, it didn't exactly go like that. But in essence, that was the message. That if we bought into hostility and fear as a way of behaving when the stress is up and the chips are down, in order to do that, we are giving up life itself. Yeshua did not come to give us a theology based in hostility and fear. And yet so often we are fed that as though that was what he spoke about. How many here have ever been told in the name of Yeshua to fear God? How bizarre is that to even be able to conceive of that idea in the name of someone who said the first law was love God. That is, that we need to cultivate the ability to be the active presence of love no matter what is happening in our world. But the game that our mind plays with us is it shows us that the very things in us that take us out of the experience of love, we hide until somebody comes along and shows it to us. That's the person. Anybody here got somebody in your life that knows how to give you the look? You know, you roll along, everything's fine until this person shows up and they can cause all hell to break loose in you in a fraction of a second, right? Why is that? That is because that hell is in you to break loose. And in fact, when they show you that part of you that you normally are in denial of and pretend doesn't exist in you, they are actually giving you the gift of showing you what your work is. Because what you cannot cling to life in the presence of, what you cannot hold active present love for, is your work, it's not theirs. The mind turns it all backward and tricks us into thinking that I wouldn't be feeling this if you hadn't done thus and so. And the truth is, the only reason you will ever feel anything is because it is in you to feel that, because your physiology has the capacity to produce that feeling. And the work of Yeshua is the work of digging into what is in you that doesn't belong in you and come to the point where your physiology can no longer produce that. And that is not a job for wimps. That's why we've turned in so many cases in the world to a theology based in fear. Oh, there'll be languaging, words about love, but when it comes down to it, fear God becomes the rule. And it's a totally and completely false theology. It's time for us to wake up to who we are as beings created out of the stuff called love. Love isn't something we do to each other. Love is the stuff we're made of. You know, the kids had a song a few years back, looking for love in all the wrong places. Well, maybe it was more than a few years, was it? Looking for love in all the wrong places. When we do not know what our being is, we think the solution of life is to just find somebody to love us. And we'll use all the tools of the world